Hello, everyone. In recent days, we have once again witnessed and heard the story of the Bryan Kohberger case, one of the most shocking massacres in America. Who is Bryan Kohberger? Why did a criminology graduate student become a cold-blooded killer? And how did four young, innocent students, peacefully asleep in their own home, become his victims? Let's explore the entire course of events together, the haunting details, and the latest outcome of this case. Moscow, Idaho, a small college town nestled among rolling hills, where autumn is often painted gold by maple leaves blanketing the quiet streets. This is the destination for thousands of students from all over, coming here to study, build their dreams, and savor the best years of their youth. Among them were four young friends: Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Goncalves. They were all studying at the University of Idaho, sharing a two-story white rental house on King Road. To many, it was just an ordinary house, but to them, it was filled with memories, birthday parties, sleepless nights studying, and late dinners gathered around the table. Ethan and Zana were a couple deeply in love, always laughing and holding hands as they walked to class. Madison and Kaylee were best friends since high school, having shared every joy and sorrow of growing up together. They were vibrant young people, full of ambition, never imagining that their lives would come to such a sudden end. It was November 2022, and the town was quietly preparing for Thanksgiving. Shops were decorated with warm lights, and the students' favorite cafes were packed with people chatting about the upcoming holiday. But amid this peaceful scene, no one realized that, in the shadows, a stranger had been watching. He silently memorized the routines of the White House on King Road, when people came and went, which windows were never locked. No one could have guessed that in just one night that peace would shatter into an unforgettable nightmare. The fateful night, around 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. Night had blanketed Moscow, Idaho, and the temperature had fallen close to freezing. In the two-story house on King Road, everything was quiet after a gentle evening of gathering. The four students had drifted off to sleep, unaware that within minutes their destinies would be forever altered. Outside, a white Hyundai Elantra slowly crept up and came to a stop along the dark curb. Its headlights went out. A tall figure dressed in black, wearing a mask and gloves, stepped out slowly. In his hand was a dagger gleaming under the dim glow of a street lamp. The door was unlocked. He gently pushed down the handle and crossed the threshold like an invisible shadow. On the first floor, two other housemates were sleeping soundly in their rooms. He passed them by. Silent footsteps carried him up the stairs straight to the second floor where Zana and Ethan lay side by side. In the darkness, he launched his attack, striking fast and mercilessly. Ethan tried to fight back but could not overcome the strength and surprise of the intruder. Then he moved to the third floor. Madison and Kaylee were asleep in the same room, never waking before the blade came down upon them. It all happened within just a few short minutes. Four young lives extinguished in terrifying silence. Around 11 a.m. that day, when one of the surviving housemates awoke, she opened her bedroom door. A horrifying sight met her: bloodstains along the hallway, a room devoid of life. A scream tore through the frozen stillness of the house. A frantic 911 call was placed, marking the beginning of the largest investigation Idaho had ever seen. A nation shocked. Within just hours of the emergency call, news of the murder of four University of Idaho students spread across America like a fierce storm. Blazing red headlines appeared on the front pages of major newspapers. Midnight massacre in Moscow, four young students brutally killed, killer still at large. The town of Moscow, once accustomed to a peaceful rhythm of life, suddenly became the epicenter of fear. Dozens of reporters descended on the area, setting up makeshift tents in front of the White House on King Road. Cameras, microphones, and satellite trucks broadcast live day and night. Locals passing by would hold their breath, turning to look, unable to believe such a horrifying scene had unfolded right within their small community. The victims' families rushed on to the earliest flights to Idaho. They had no time to brace themselves for such devastating loss. Many collapsed at the security barricades, crying out their children's names in the midst of the silent press corps. Meanwhile, Moscow City Police, Idaho State Police, and FBI agents formed a special investigative task force. Yellow tape cordoned off the entire house. Forensic vans came and went constantly. Investigators in white protective suits quietly collected every possible piece of evidence: blood traces, strands of hair, footprints, anything that might reveal clues about the killer. One question haunted everyone: who could commit such a ruthless act and then vanish without a trace? A dangerous murderer was still free out there, and no one knew what his face looked like. The first clue: when the forensic investigation team began combing through every room, they discovered an object that seemed small but held a crucial answer: a Kabar knife sheath that had fallen right next to the bed where Madison Mogan lay lifeless. It was the kind of tactical knife commonly used in the military, with a razor-sharp blade and a hard handle. On the snap button of the sheath, examiners found an unidentified male DNA sample. This was the first clear and concrete clue the police had in their possession. In a case where the perpetrator had left no fingerprints whatsoever, this ding was like a faint glimmer of light in a dense darkness. While the lab rushed to analyze the DNA, investigators searched the entire surrounding area. They found surveillance cameras at several nearby homes and businesses. As they combed through hours of footage, one suspicious detail stood out. A white Hyundai Elantra repeatedly appeared, driving past King Road multiple times between 3 and 4 a.m., matching precisely the window when the murders occurred. The car never fully stopped, but instead slowly circled the block, as if the driver were scouting and waiting for the perfect moment. News of the car was quickly made public. Within hours, social media exploded with theories. Some insisted the killer was an obsessive stalker fixated on one of the victims. Others believed it was the work of a serial murderer, testing the police's ability to catch him. Rumors spread far and wide, but no one yet knew the truth. Only the white Hyundai Elantra and the Kabar knife sheath stood as the first two puzzle pieces of that horrifying picture. The moment of capture. After images of the white Hyundai Elantra were widely released, hundreds of calls and messages flooded the police tip line. A long list of potential car owners was compiled. Among them, one name quickly stood out: Bryan Kohberger, a PhD criminology student at Washington State University, just about a 15-minute drive from Moscow. Kohberger's background drew the investigators' special attention. Not only did he own a white Hyundai Elantra, but he also had an extensive academic knowledge of criminal behavior, having participated in research on murder and crime scene investigation techniques. By late December 2022, a team of FBI agents was quietly tracking Kohberger's every move. They followed his car's routes and collected trash from the bin outside his parents' house in Pennsylvania to compare DNA. The forensic results revealed a chilling match between the DNA on the K-bar knife sheath and Kohberger's DNA. On December 30th, as the town of Moscow was still steeped in grief, federal and local police coordinated a surprise midnight raid. They stormed into the Kohberger family home, where he had returned for the holidays. At the moment of arrest, Bryan Kohberger did not resist. He was dressed in black and wearing medical gloves, as if prepared for another act, or perhaps simply to avoid leaving fingerprints. His face was eerily calm as he was handcuffed and led away under the blinding glare of patrol car lights. After weeks of pursuit and thousands of hours of investigation, police believed they had finally found the killer who stole the lives of 4 young students. But the biggest question still remained: why did he do it? The suspect's profile. When Bryan Kohberger was arrested, he was only 28 years old. He wasn't some anonymous drifter or a person with a violent criminal record. On the contrary, Kohberger was a graduate student pursuing a PhD in criminology at Washington State University, a prestigious program focused on criminal psychology and crime scene investigation. In the eyes of colleagues and some professors, Kohberger was meticulous and highly ambitious. He frequently asked sharp questions about investigative techniques, how police collected evidence, and the mindset of killers. One professor even remarked that he had an almost obsessive curiosity about crime. Classmates described him as quiet, with a cold stare, occasionally making sarcastic comments that made others uncomfortable. During seminars, Kohberger often came across as arrogantly confident, convinced he understood better than anyone the nature of humanity and the mechanics of committing murder. His personal history revealed a troubled past. Kohberger had struggled with drug addiction in high school, then recovered and channeled his energy into academics. Many once believed he was a success story of overcoming adversity. But after the murders, everyone looked back and saw the unsettling signs that had been overlooked. His chilling remarks and the disturbing questions he asked about killing, delivered with an unsettling fascination. He once told friends during a debate, "A smart killer will never be caught because they know exactly what the police will be looking for." No one could have guessed that statement would become a declaration before a real-life tragedy. The chilling evidence. When the arrest warrant for Kohberger was announced, prosecutors simultaneously presented a series of pieces of evidence that stunned the entire country. First was the DNA sample found on the snap button of the Ka-Bar knife sheath left at the crime scene. Forensic analysis confirmed that this DNA matched Kohberger's, with a margin of error so small it was virtually non-existent. But that was not all. Cell phone location data showed that in the weeks leading up to the murders, Kohberger had driven multiple times through the King Road neighborhood where the victims lived. His phone had been detected near the house at least 12 times, as if he had been silently observing their daily routines. Additionally, security cameras from nearby streets captured footage of the white Hyundai Elantra repeatedly passing by before and after the time of the massacre. On the night of the crime, the car appeared in the area during the exact window when the victims were believed to have been killed. Investigators also found research on Kohberger's computer about killer behavior, DNA trace investigation methods, and police crime-solving procedures. Several classmates testified that after the murders, he seemed obsessed, repeatedly asking them what they thought about the perpetrator and discussing how the killer might have planned it all. Public opinion was shaken by the cruel irony. A criminology student, formally trained to understand and prevent crime, had used that very knowledge to commit a cold-blooded, meticulously executed murder. Images of Kohberger sitting impassively in the courtroom became a chilling symbol of how thin the line can be between studying crime and committing it in reality. The preliminary hearing. In January 2023, less than a month after his arrest, Bryan Kohberger appeared before the Latah County Court in Idaho for his first hearing. Footage of him stepping out of a security vehicle was broadcast live across every major news channel. Kohberger wore a beige bulletproof vest, his hands cuffed, his face utterly expressionless. Reporters described the moment as eerily unsettling. Just a few meters away sat the victims' families, many of whom could not hold back their tears. Yet Kohberger stood motionless, staring straight ahead without ever lowering his gaze. When the judge read out the indictment, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary, he maintained his calm demeanor. When it was his turn to respond, Kohberger spoke slowly, his voice steady and unshaken. "I am not guilty." That declaration felt like a knife twisting into the victim's family's grief. Some people broke down crying right there in the courtroom. Others could only lower their heads, clenching their hands to contain their rage. Kohberger's attorney announced that they would prepare an extensive defense strategy. The prosecutor, meanwhile, declared that the case contained all the elements to pursue the death penalty, and the trial could take years, involving hundreds of witnesses and thousands of pages of investigative records. Though it was only the beginning, the first hearing already raised a haunting question in everyone's mind. How could someone like Kohberger so meticulously conceal such monstrous crimes? And would justice have the strength to punish him in proportion to what he had done? Crushing pressure. In the months after Kohberger's arrest, the victims' families lived in unimaginable anguish, compounded by mental exhaustion. Every new day was another confrontation with the cruel memory of their loss and questions that had no answers. The media surrounded them everywhere. The house on King Road was cordoned off, yet reporters remained camped outside. Whenever any family member appeared, dozens of camera lenses immediately turned towards them. Scenes of funerals, portraits of the 4 young students, the tears and choked sobs became familiar images on national news broadcasts. Many relatives shared that they had fallen into a state of fear and despair so deep it seemed endless. They desperately wanted to see justice served, but at the same time feared that a trial stretching on for years, with countless court sessions, appeals, and tense hearings, would keep reopening the wound that never had a chance to heal. America's justice system now faced a daunting dilemma. Prosecutors insisted Kohberger's crimes warranted the death penalty because of their extraordinary brutality and the number of victims. But to achieve such a sentence, the trial would turn into a drawn-out legal battle in which every excruciating detail of the massacre would be dissected in public view. The victims' families were torn between 2 options. On one hand, the maximum punishment for the killer. On the other, the wish to end the unending nightmare and find a measure of peace. Would the death penalty truly soothe their grief, or would it only prolong the tragedy for everyone left behind? The plea deal, after nearly 3 years of waiting, finally, in June 2025, the Latah County prosecutor and Kohberger's defense team announced a historic decision. A plea agreement intended to bring closure to one of America's most shocking cases. Under the terms of the deal, Bryan Kohberger would formally admit to all his actions, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of armed burglary. In return, the prosecution agreed not to pursue the death penalty, the maximum sentence Idaho law allowed for such an exceptionally grave massacre. Instead of facing execution and potentially decades of appeals, Kohberger would be sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus up to 10 additional years for burglary, meaning he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. On July 2nd, 2025, in a courtroom packed with reporters, Kohberger was escorted to the stand. For the first time since his arrest, he lowered his head, his voice hoarse as he admitted to all the crimes. The victims' families sat in stunned silence. Many broke down in tears as he spoke the names of each of their children he had killed. The judge accepted the guilty plea and declared the criminal proceedings officially closed. For some families, it was a moment of relief. Finally, the relentless legal nightmare was over. But for others, the avoidance of the death penalty felt like yet another knife twisting into their grief. This agreement not only closed the largest criminal case in Idaho's history, but also left deep debates about justice and forgiveness. Though Kohberger will die in prison, the question of why he did it remains an unsettling mystery haunting everyone. Divided reactions. Immediately after the plea agreement was announced, the public and the victims' families split into two fiercely opposing camps. For some families, this was the only way to end the nightmare that had dragged on for nearly 3 years. They believed that Kohberger receiving 4 life sentences without parole was enough to ensure he would spend the rest of his days in isolation and guilt. A relative of Madison Mogen shared with reporters, "Nothing can bring her back, but at least we don't have to hear the brutal details of that night 100 more times. We can start learning how to live again." Yet not everyone could accept it. The family of Kaylee Goncalves was among the most outspoken opponents. They had repeatedly declared that only the death penalty could match the severity of Kohberger's crimes. In an emotional interview, Kaylee's father said, "We don't want a murderer to be spared, even if it's only to exist behind bars. My daughter doesn't get a second chance. Why should he?" On social media, thousands of heated comments erupted. Some argued that the death penalty only prolonged suffering and did nothing to make society better. Others insisted that letting Kohberger live was an insult to the pain of the families of the 4 victims. Those debates had no end. Everyone carried their own scars, their own beliefs about justice, and a question no one could answer. Could any sentence ever make up for the lives that were lost? A message from the case. The murder of 4 students in Idaho was not just a personal tragedy or a sensational crime story. It is a chilling reminder that evil does not always wear a monstrous face. It can hide behind intellect and a cold, confident demeanor. Bryan Kohberger once sat in lecture halls studying criminal psychology, learning to analyze the motives of killers. He knew the details of investigations, understood which mistakes would expose an offender. And because of that, he believed he would never be caught. But no matter how carefully planned, crime always leaves traces. No matter what intellectual mask it wears, cruelty remains cruelty. This case is a warning about how fragile our sense of safety really is. That behind an unlocked door, behind a polite smile, sometimes lies a darkness no one can imagine. When the judge read the final sentence, the courtroom fell completely silent. The victims' families wept, clutching their children's portraits in their arms. Kohberger lowered his head and said nothing. On paper, everything was over, but in the hearts of those left behind, this nightmare will likely never truly end. They will never again hear the laughter, the conversations, the unfinished plans of those 20-year-old kids. And the biggest question, why, may never have a complete answer. If this story made you reflect, please share it, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment below. Let us remember together that justice is not always perfect, but the truth must always be told, so that no one forgets the innocent lives that were lost.